Hello and welcome to another edition of Pete's This Week from the Cogeco TV production studios, a playoff preview edition of Pete's This Week. Once again, I'm your host, Dan Malton. Today, we're joined by Steve Clark, one of my favorite broadcasting crews in the OHL, and coincidentally, the team the Petes are going to be taking on in the first round. Steve, you're working on the Niagara Ice Dogs broadcast all season. How's that been for you guys?
You know, Dan, it's been a lot of fun, for us as a broadcast unit to cover a young team that's really been growing a lot this year. There's a lot of fun in covering a team like last year that went all the way to the OHL final before losing to London. But this year, obviously the record isn't the same as it was last year. But there's been some young players who have really stepped in and have really developed well over the year, and we'll have to wait and see how well they do when the playoff pressure hits.
And for a team that finished 17th in the OHL in terms of the overall standings, 5th in attendance, why would you say that is right now in Niagara?
Well, that's an excellent question, and I really think it's because hockey at the Meridian Center has now become an event. It's become one of the hot spots. There's close to 5,000 people in the building here all the time. They pretty well sold out the last couple months of the year, and that includes private boxes and everything like that. So people are invested in the brand of the Niagara Ice Dogs, and I'm sure they're invested in the team as well, but they're invested in the events of coming out to a beautiful arena and watching hockey.
And now let's just dive into the season series between the Petes and the Ice Dogs. The Petes separated by 33 points in the overall standings over top of the Ice Dogs, and their season series was spread out pretty much as evenly as it could have been throughout the season. October, a Petes win. November, a Petes win. January, the Ice Dogs grabbed a win. And in the last meeting, a 3-2 Petes win in February. What did you see from that season series, and what does that tell you about what could be an exciting first round of the playoffs?
Well, there's a couple things. I mean, the first two games, they were relatively early in the year, and the Ice Dogs were still finding their way. And I'm not going to use that as an excuse. Peterborough won those games fair and square. The last two games I felt were very close. I mean, Niagara took that one in January 4-3, and then needed a Korostelev goal. Peterborough needed a Korostelev goal in the third period of their last matchup. So even though they're separated by 33 points, the Ice Dogs played the Petes pretty tough. And that's a credit to a young team playing against a very, very good team. And I don't think this is going to be a walkover series for the Peterborough Petes by any stretch of the imagination. I think Niagara has shown that they can hang with them, even though Peterborough is a very deep and a very strong team. And there's a very good reason, as you know from covering the team all year, Dan, that they're first place in the conference. And they've earned that positioning very much so.
A big factor for the Petes is St. Catharines native Dylan Wells, and I'm sure he's excited to play in this series in his hometown. But in net for the Ice Dogs, Stephen Dillon faced the most shots in the OHL this season. How big of a factor do you think he can play when he's on his game? Because he still has pretty good numbers despite all the action he saw.
Yeah, he really has been brilliant for Niagara, Dan, and he's really, to me, the co-MVP along with Ryan Mantha. I mean, he played almost 60 games this year. You talk about the number of shots that were faced. I think he was over 25 times, close to 30 times he faced 40 or more shots. Twice against Erie, there were 60 shots against the Ice Dogs. I mean, this is a young defense that really faced their goaltender to be peppered on a nightly basis, and more often than not, Stephen Dillon would keep the Ice Dogs in the game. Like Dylan Wells, he's a guy who can steal a game or two, and if he steals a game or two, then that could make the series a lot more interesting. He's a guy who was passed over in the NHL draft last year. He's draft eligible again this year. He's not going to get passed over again. His body of work really speaks for itself. And I guess the good thing for Peterborough is because he plays so much, there's no end of video that the Peterborough Petes coaching staff can look at and look at the tendencies of Stephen Dillon. He really has been outstanding. 59
games he actually saw action in, which is astronomical in terms of a young goaltender, how much work he put in this season. And he spoke a bit about the back end. And I want to talk about the gap in points from Ryan Mantha down to Aaron Hayden. It goes from 58 down to 15. Why is he the only one on the back end who's producing numbers for the Ice Dogs? And do you think that'll be a problem?
I think it will be. I mean, obviously, you take a look at Peterborough's back end, and they've got 3 or 4 guys who can produce points. And even with Aaron Hayden, he produced some of those points playing forward the first half of the year. So he actually, the production from the defense is a little bit less than what you alluded to. Simply put, Ryan Mantha is a dynamic offensive player. He can separate himself from the rest of the team. The rest of the team is a young team. and they've got a couple guys who are young guys who have kind of focused on the stay-at-home role and have done that quite well in Willie Lahed, a forward who was converted to defense, and Jonathan Schaefer, who's been partnered up with Ryan Mantha. He really has been the stabilizing force while Mantha goes, and thinks more offense. Hayden's a rugged defender, and then you get into the youth of the Ice Dogs. Liam Ham, who's injured and is a question for the series or the beginning of the series. Drew Hunter, Justin McPherson, Andrew Somerville. These are all young players, and it's very difficult for a young player to step in and to be offensively dynamic. So I think those guys are trying to take care of their defensive responsibilities before thinking about offense and being told to play really a simpler game.
Right now, a guy who I consider a super rookie, and Akil Thomas. How has he grown over the course of the season, and how big of a factor do you expect him to be in this first round? Will the more physical playoff game affect him at all? As a younger player, I know he did have success against the Petes this season, 3 goals in those 4 matchups.
Yeah, I mean, he's a guy who's certainly very dangerous offensively. He's playing with a couple of veterans in Johnny Corneal and Ben Jones. I don't see any reason that trio will be split up over the course of the series. So that helps free up a little bit of space for him. But quite simply, he's a speed guy, and he's got a great shot. And that doesn't matter who you're going to play against. That's going to give any team problem. But I think you hit on something in which maybe a way to throw Akil Thomas off of his game is to get physical with him. I did notice that towards the latter part of the season, the last weekend of the season, especially against Mississauga. Teams were getting physical against him, and it certainly affected him. I mean, he's a skilled player. He's a talented player, and he probably expects that attention, but certainly it's something that he's going to have to watch out for. But the Petes are going to have to watch out for him as well. His offensive creativity is wonderful. His shot is deceptively quick, and there's a reason he potted over 20 goals this year.
I'm excited to see him in action, maybe some end-to-end play for both teams, as I believe they're both teams that like to run and gun a little bit. Now, just from watching the Ice Dogs, they're a unique group, as you mentioned, some old guys and then a ton of young guys, and they're a year off of what happened last year where they took a run and now just sneaking into the playoffs. What would you use to describe them as a team, as just a style of play?
Yeah, they really run hot and cold. They're like the little girl with the curl. When they're good, they're really good. When they're bad, they're not very much fun for their fans to watch. And this is a momentum team as well. It seems as if they get one, and especially at home, they get the crowd into it. They seem to really thrive off of that, and they can roll and really put pressure on a team. And that's what speed teams can do in Niagara. It does have a ton of speed that Peterborough is going to have to deal with. And Niagara is going to have to deal with Peterborough's depth in forward. Peterborough can roll some pretty good lines that are pretty balanced, and their defense, of course, is also very, very strong. And that's going to be a challenge for the Ice Dogs. For the Petes, if they really kind of get into the heads of the Ice Dogs, show them that they're the boss, show them they're the more experienced team, then the Ice Dogs are going to have trouble. But this team, to me, doesn't seem like they are intimidated by much. There's a confidence, there's a little bit of a brashness about the team, and a little bit of a chip on the shoulder. Some of the young players on the team, I think, that will serve them well going forward in the playoffs. But really, they're looking at this right now as a learning experience for them, and they're just going to see how far this learning experience is going to carry them.
Is that just youth that has the chip on their shoulder, or is that coming from the coaching staff and the team leadership?
I think there's a chip on the shoulder of some of the young players, and I mean that in a positive way, in that they don't look like they get intimidated, that much. I think the coaching staff is actually pretty grounded. It's a coaching staff that works very well together. A first-year head coach in David Bell, but a veteran hockey man. Billy Burke, the assistant coach, is a young guy, but he's been the assistant coach of the team for 8 or 9 years. And Chris Sayre is a guy who played in the OHL. He played for the then Mississauga St. Michael's Majors way back in 2007, 2008, and a little bit afterwards before embarking on a pro career. He's a pretty young guy as well. So there's youth in terms of the Ice Dogs coaching staff, but they're pretty grounded. And I think that serves the Ice Dog young players well when they kind of get, a little bit, I would say, away from the game plan and start to freelance a little bit.
So, Steve, I'm not going to ask you for a playoff prediction here, as in how many games this series will end in, but what do you know about the Peterborough Petes, just from an outsider's perspective, something I always like to ask the guests on the show. What's your view of the team from afar?
Well, I'm glad you didn't ask me for any sorts of predictions. I'm generally terrible at predictions. That's why I don't fill out basketball brackets or get involved in pools and things like that. So thank you for that. What I see from Peterborough is I see a good, strong, solid team. I don't see too many holes. I don't see weaknesses. I see a back end in which has got 3 guys who could really rush the puck in Tim's and Matt Spencer and Kyle Jenkins. And then you've got the stay-at-home guy like a veteran like Brandon Profit. So they're very, very well balanced. Forward, they've got, even though they don't seem to have that big 80, 90 point producer, they all do their job well. You get 33 goals from a guy like Logan DeNoble. You add in a Jonathan Ang. The two guys they added, I mean, other teams like the Londons and the Eries, they just piled up on the Stars. Peterborough made smart acquisitions that fit their game plan quite well. Nikita Korostelev can do a lot of damage on the special teams, and he's a creative offensive player. And we know Chris Paquette quite well in Niagara, a guy who was kind of reaching his potential but hadn't quite got there yet. And I think he brings a good dynamic really to the Peterborough Petes. And the goaltender's outstanding. I'm really a big fan of Dylan Wells. He always plays very well in Niagara, and judging by the statistics, the Edmonton Oilers are going to be very happy with him, and he's played well all year long. Going to be very, very tough for the Niagara Ice Dogs to find a crack in this good, strong Petes team.
All right, now you, Ed Burkhalter, and Al Galloway, you guys seem to have a lot of fun during the broadcasts. What are those like for you guys, and how much fun is it with those two? You guys have great chemistry.
Well, we've been doing it for 10 years now. Ever since Niagara started in 2007, it's been myself, Ed, and Al. And you're right, we have a lot of fun. We get along very well away from the ice. We enjoy socializing with one another. And I think when that happens, it does carry over onto the air. I mean, when we sit in the media room before the game, obviously we're doing our work, but we're having just as many laughs as we are in terms of game preparation. And it's just a case of us loving hockey broadcasting, loving to talk about broadcasting, loving to talk about hockey. All that has come together, and for us, we're pretty proud of our body of work in Niagara, and we've got a great product in front of us. We enjoy it very much. We all realize how fortunate we are to be in the positions that we are as well.
You guys are having a lot of fun at Cogeco TV in Niagara, and also there's an Ice Dogs this week show, similar to the Petes this week show. It's Matt and DJ. How's that show going for those guys?
You know what? It's the second year that they've done the show, and they do wonderful things with it. I mean, these are guys who truly know the product of the Ontario Hockey League and the Niagara Ice Dogs inside out. They're friends away from the rink, and I think that carries over onto the air. They have players on every week. The players love going on to that show and really talking hockey, and Matt and DJ really make them feel comfortable. It's a good, strong half-hour show that I think Niagara fans have come to enjoy. They've come to embrace. And sometimes you get hockey players maybe they don't want to do some of the media things. They're a little bit camera shy, but they all seem to have fun when they go on Matt and DJ show Ice Dogs this week. And it's great for the kids to get a little bit of promotion, to get themselves on TV, to talk a little bit of hockey, and for the Ice Dogs to get some much needed promotion outside of the games that we cover.
And now, Steve, you're in a classroom right now. I understand you're a high school teacher, so that's the chalkboard behind you for reference for people.
Chalkboard in the background.
We should have got you to fill in some fun quotes on there, just like all around the horn. And now, if people want to follow you on Twitter, or anybody that you work with on Twitter, how can they do that?
You can find me. I'm at Clark Play-by-Play. And I love interacting with fans on Twitter as long as everybody keeps it respectful. I even love debating and disagreeing with people on Twitter as long as it doesn't get silly like Twitter can get sometimes. Al Galloway is AGalloway31, and Ed Burkhalter is eBurkhalter Hockey, I believe. So we're all involved on Twitter. We all love our social media, and I believe Matt and DJ, you can find them at Ice Dogs this week.
All right, thanks a lot. That's Steve Clark, play-by-play voice of Niagara Ice Dogs. We'll catch you for Game 4. Sportsnet's picking up Game 3 for you guys, I believe. So we'll see you then. Thanks again for joining me.
Thanks a lot, Dan. I'm looking forward to the series, and good luck to the Peterborough Petes.
All right, thanks a lot. We'll head to break now. When we come back, highlights of the Petes action from last week, Ottawa, Hamilton, and then Sunday to close out the season. You're watching Petes This Week on Cogeco TV.